There's a psychology secret that can really revolutionize the way you approach change, and the truth is, few people in business have heard of it. Self-determination theory identifies 3 core drivers that, when blocked, absolutely undermine any transformation effort. So when people resist change, when they sabotage or self-sabotage, it might not be because they're just difficult. When one of those 3 human drivers is blocked, people develop self-sabotaging behaviour. Dr. Tasha Eurich has cracked the code on what separates people who merely get through change and those that actually flourish during change. And at the heart of it is understanding these 3 core drivers. So, are you ready to understand the Shatterproof approach to change and change management? I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change and transformation. Now, before we get going, today is a first because we're releasing 2 episodes at the same time. That's because they pair beautifully together. This one is with Dr. Tasha Eurich, and the other one is with Professor Roy Baumeister. And in the conversation with Tasha, we edited it out, but she said she considers Roy to be one of her 5 rock star heroes of psychology. And it was too good an opportunity to miss, so I wanted to pair them up. I think you're going to find it a lovely combination. There's a resilience paradox at the heart of change and transformation. On the one hand, of course, you as a change leader, you need to be able to keep going. You need resilience, however you define that. On the other hand, you're trying to actively dismantle and change some of the ways of your organization, some of the ways it hasn't been working. I mean, you're hoping, ironically, that your organization is not resilient, at least not in the places and the spaces you're turning attention to. But back to you. I mean, how are you doing? Because let's face it, it is mostly hard work leading change. And I'm wondering how you're managing to keep the energy, keep the focus, keep the momentum. And I am curious to know, are you using quote unquote old school resilience techniques, amping up the grit and pushing hard and pushing through?
Instead of pushing through, you start to pay attention and you say, okay, pain biologically and psychologically is a signal that something isn't quite right. And so the process of becoming shatterproof, it starts with that awareness of saying, pain isn't a personal failure, it's a signal to pay attention.
Yeah, that's Dr. Tasha Eurich. And her new book, brings both original research and practical tools to help you and me actually get beyond the old school definition of resilience. I mean, Tasha's a friend. So when she told me 2 years ago that her book was going to be called Shatterproof, How to Thrive in a World of Constant Chaos and Why Resilience Alone Isn't Enough, I was excited and I was intrigued. I mean, that is a great title and that is a great aspiration. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. Tasha, hi there.
Michael, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I remember you just floating this idea of Shatterproof out over a fancy afternoon, champagne and sandwiches lunch.
At the Dorchester.
Exactly, how posh. And just going, oh, wow, that's, you've already got the title. And when you got the title and that big idea, and your book totally lives up to it, which is so exciting. You open the book by saying that the chaos era is upon us. What does that mean? What is the chaos era?
Yeah, the chaos era, it's kind of an interesting concept, right? Because if you think about even the last, forget COVID, the last 2 years,
right,
the last 6 years, the last 10 years, we can go all the way back to, the Great Recession, kind of arguably the dawn of the chaos era. But really, when you look at objective measures of chaos and uncertainty. One of them is called the World Uncertainty Index.
Right.
You actually see that it has continued to rise. 9/11 was a big spike. The recession of 2008 was a big spike. And so the way I define the chaos era is we live in an age of increasingly chronic and compounding stress across multiple domains of our lives.
Got it.
So it's never just, oh, everything else is great, but I'm really stressed at work.
Right.
It's, I've got a sick parent. I have a child who's being bullied. I am gunning for this promotion, or my boss is a horrible micromanager, right? There's all of this stuff that's coming at us at once. And I think it's very important for change management. The human body was actually not designed to flourish under those conditions of, again, chronic and compounding stress and change.
There's a lot going on. And one of the things that you're saying in the book is resilience is no longer enough. You've got this idea of shatterproof, but let's talk about, where does resilience fall short in this era of chaos?
So let me define it first, because
Please.
I think there's, people are all over the map. But what researchers generally agree, mostly, there's some debate, is that it's our capacity to cope with hard things.
Right.
And it's a very valuable resource for sudden, unexpected crises. But where it starts to fall short is, I'll kind of give you two overall ways that it limits us. The first is, if we're constantly having to use our resilience, guess what? It's not an unlimited resource.
Right.
We reach what I call it the resilience ceiling at some point. And sometimes we break under the weight of a feather. It's a CEO I worked with recently said, I was fine until the second I wasn't.
Right.
And I think that's really good.
Jumping in quickly here, because this is so good. So often what happens to us is non-linear. It was good until it wasn't. For me, I always think things tend to go slow, fast.
And then the second way resilience limits us, actually, not only was it not designed for the chaos era, but there's been, in this game of telephone between the hardcore scientific research and the popular conceptualization of resilience, there's been a little bit of an evolution maybe between what the science actually shows us and what we believe it will do for us.
Got it.
So the biggest disconnect between the hardcore resilience research and sort of what we expect it to do for us on a day-to-day basis is the resilience researchers, they don't promise that you're going to have these amazing transformations where your life gets better and suddenly you're walking on the clouds and you have no problems. The way researchers define resilience is kind of two buckets. One is getting back to your baseline.
Yeah.
Right? Like where you were before, which is usually kind of a suboptimal status quo. And then the other one is maintaining equilibrium.
Right.
You're not getting better. You're just sort of staying the way you are. But what we've started to believe, based on what I think are, very good intentioned efforts, it's been positioned as the end all be all. And so you have, think about change management interventions. You have companies who are spending billions of dollars. I think I read somewhere that 95% of large organizations invest in some kind of resilience or wellness program.
Right.
But they're not getting the results they want. Like their employee engagement surveys aren't going up and people are still burnt out and they're still quitting. And that's why is we've sort of positioned this tool that, first of all, isn't working very well for us anyway in this era.
Yeah.
And then we're also expecting it to do something that it wasn't designed to do.
So I'm excited to take us through this idea of shatterproof. And I want people listening to be thinking about it both at a personal level and also what are Tasha's insights and how do they scale at an organizational level as well. But let's talk about what shatterproof is. I mean, it's such a resonant word, but what does it mean to you?
So I started a research program about 5 years ago to try to study a different kind of person, not just the kind of person who bounces back when things get tough, but somebody who grows forward.
Right.
And so if you paint the picture, let me make a distinction, and then I'll give you the definition of shatterproof.
Yes, please.
The prototypical resilient person is the one who, what's the expression? Like, get knocked down 9 times, get up 10.
Yeah.
You're just pushing and pushing and saying, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I can do this. Be mentally tough. Just get on my meditation app for longer and I'll be okay.
Can I just say, I hate that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I have never liked that saying.
Yeah, what doesn't kill you makes you more vulnerable to breaking. Basically.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So this is the first category. And God bless these people. They are doing everything they were told to do. But in this research project, we found a group of people. It was much smaller. Like most people bounce back. Most people are resilient. But this smaller group, they didn't just survive. They got wiser. They found more peace. They were stronger. They were more self-aware. They were more prepared for future challenges. And so the distinction is they weren't just bouncing back. They were growing forward.
Right.
And of course, we had to figure out what were they doing differently. But at a high level, what it means to become shatterproof, because we're never there, we're becoming all the time, is you're making a decision that you are worth more than barely getting by.
Right.
And that you are going to have the courage to harness your toughest moments to become a better version of you and to bring out new versions of the best version of you, right? So you're not just kind of getting back to that less stressed out me from 2015.
Yeah.
You're becoming, that person plus things that you never even knew you were capable of. And so that was what we tried to figure out. What were they doing differently?
But it's very nuanced, Tasha. I mean, how do you get to a place where you can be that person? Because it sounds aspirational, but I'm not quite sure how to get there.
Yeah. So that's the nut we had to crack, because I think you're right. There are so many platitudes that sound like becoming shatterproof. You hear the CEO at the town hall is, again, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. We're going to turn crisis into opportunity. There was that famous speech that JFK gave, and I think it was in the late 60s, I guess. Yeah, 1969, where he said, the Chinese character for crisis also means opportunity.
Danger and opportunity together.
Danger, but there's just one problem is that's actually not true. I do a whole analysis of that in the book. But what shatterproof people do differently, I've really come down to see as two changes that they make. First and foremost is a mindset.
Right.
And then along with that mindset is kind of a repeatable process or a series of habits that I talk about. I call it the 4-step Shatterproof roadmap. But it's really about, sort of at the end of the day, in the moments that you find yourself forcing yourself to resiliently endure.
Yeah.
Instead of gaslighting yourself and being like, come on, Eurich, you're tougher than this, buck up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pain is a signal, psychological pain, that one of our 3 fundamental needs is being frustrated, either by our environment around us or sometimes inadvertently by ourselves.
Right.
And so the process of becoming shatterproof, it starts with that awareness of saying, pain isn't a personal failure. It's a signal to pay attention.
Right.
And I think that mindset is the first step of being, and I'll be honest with you, this is a choice that, even the most shatterproof people usually aren't making 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it's about recognizing which of your needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
And finding new ways to what psychologists call craft those needs.
I love that.
So no matter what's happening around us, right, we're not going to just sit there and endure the status quo. We're going to say, okay, there's things in my control, there's things out of my control.
Yeah.
But there's usually a lot more than we know that we can control. And so this 4-step roadmap actually talks you through becoming shatterproof.
Tasha, I'm a change leader. And I'm going, you know what, this is hard. I actually, my resilience reserves are low. I'm feeling that. I could do with a little shatterproofness. And I'm already starting to notice some of the kind of the pain. I'm getting permission that I don't have to keep grinding my way through it. You've tantalized me with this 4-step shatterproof process. So can you give us a sense of how to move through that?
Yeah, totally. So I'm going to keep it pretty high level.
Yeah.
Really, even if you just know the names of these 4 steps, it provides a fairly actionable response.
Yeah.
So, and they're all alliterative, so they're easy to remember. Step 1 of the Shatterproof roadmap is to probe our pain. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but the resilient instinct is to push through it. It's to push it down. It's to ignore it.
Yeah.
But what we know through something that I call the pain paradox is when we do that, we experience rebound effects that actually make us worse. So that's the first step that Shatterproof people do, is they recognize, okay, this is real. It doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It means that something's wrong.
It's worth hitting pause here just to underline this, because it sounds obvious. Hey, notice there's something wrong. But I think in actuality, this is trickier than it might sound. It is so easy just to slightly ignore what's not working and to keep plugging away and pushing forward. Let me share with you how I try and get better at this. Every morning I journal. There are 3 questions I answer, and the first of the 3 questions is, what am I noticing? What's in front of me? What's in my head? What's in my heart? What's behind me? What's around me? It is a question designed for me to become present to myself, present to my world, present to how things are going. I'm checking in to see how I'm doing. All right, back to the conversation. And you mentioned 3 fundamental needs that aren't getting addressed. Can you give us the headline of what those 3 needs are?
It's a perfect transition into step 2, which is trace your triggers.
Nice.
And then if there was a parenthetical, it would be to your unmet needs.
Got it.
Then it wouldn't be 3 words in a letter.
Exactly.
So step 2 is about saying, okay, I've acknowledged this pain. Something is wrong, right? I might be getting in my own way. The environment might be triggering some unmet need. Usually it's both. So what I need to do is scan my environment and say, what am I reacting to? I've got a whole list of the most common triggers in the book, but what I would say is our triggers can be some of our greatest teachers. Triggers reveal a frustrated need, and all of our triggers are different. The needs are the same.
Got it.
So what's important to know for change leaders is these 3 needs are based on one of the most well-supported theories in psychology called self-determination theory that almost no one in the business world has heard of, right? It's a huge opportunity. Basically, we are biologically programmed to seek a sense of confidence, right? Like, I'm doing well, I'm getting better. We're programmed to seek a sense of choice, which means I feel agency and authenticity. And then finally, a sense of connection, which is about belonging and closeness with others.
Yeah. I'm just going to highlight those 3 core needs because Tasha skipped through them fairly quickly. Conveniently, they all start with the letter C. There's confidence, I'm getting better. Choice, I have agency. And connection, I belong. Back to Tasha and the triggers.
And so the essence of this second step is if you pay attention internally and externally, if you say, what is that thing that really put me over the edge today? Or what are those 10 things yesterday? You can start to say, oh, that's a connection frustration. Oh, that's a choice frustration.
Yeah.
And very often, well, by the way, we need all 3 to psychologically flourish. But when we're missing even just one, it turns us from the best version of ourselves into the beast of ourselves.
So probe your pain, trace the triggers. The third one is spot your shadows. So what does that mean?
So this is where it gets interesting, and we've got to be really
interesting.
On it. Well, that's
it really interesting.
It wasn't before. To me, this is where it gets deep is the right word.
Yeah.
So this actually comes from the work of Carl Jung, who it's funny, as a psychologist, I didn't have a really deep knowledge of his work until I started exploring this. But he was the first psychologist that came up with this concept. And basically, what a shadow is an instinctive response to a persistently thwarted need that turns us into the worst version of ourselves.
So good.
And he didn't define it so much as the needs, but he defined it as when you become the person no one wants to be.
Right.
Example, if your confidence is, consistently thwarted in any area of your life, you might get defensive. You might start trying to win or achieve at all costs.
Yeah.
You might escape things. You might procrastinate and just avoid situations that make you feel unconfident. With choice, you can kind of do one of 2 things. You can go overboard and rebel, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can excessively try to control yourself, what you're eating, what you're doing, you're exercising, micromanaging others.
Yeah.
Or counterintuitively, you can just give up. And that's actually, I talk about a medical journey that I went through over the course of a couple of years in the book, where strangely, when I wasn't getting answers, I just kept shuffling from specialist to specialist and doing what they told me.
Right.
And I just gave up all my power and control.
Yeah.
But it's a way, again, it's our instinctive response that unconsciously, sort of our unconscious thinks is helping us get that need. Like, I just don't even care anymore. Why does choice matter if I don't care?
How do we get more attuned to spotting our shadows? I mean, you're inviting us to be quite self-aware in this process, Tasha.
I am, aren't I?
You are, which like I am all for.
I tend to do that.
Yes. But I also recognize that it's a lifetime's work to actually figure out who the hell you are. So how would I get a little more attuned into what my shadows might be, or how I might be showing up in Shadowland?
So I have the best, simplest shadow-seeking question.
I thought you might.
And it is this. The question is, when you notice yourself becoming the worst version of yourself, how is this behavior different from when I'm at my best?
Love it.
Example. When I was shuffling from doctor to doctor, I finally asked myself that question.
Right. Why am I passive and without agency?
Yeah. Not even why.
Yeah.
But how does it differ from when I'm at my best? So
thank you.
I think we've talked about this before, and I remember you laughing, but both of us make a living wrestling the very strong personalities of, very powerful people that don't like to be told the truth, right?
That's it.
And I didn't earn my nickname, the Velvet Hammer, by being passive and letting them take charge. But then I noticed, when I'm coaching a CEO, if I'm sitting down and giving a feedback report and saying, listen, everyone kind of thinks you're a jerk, I don't let them set the pace of that meeting.
No. I
sit down, I slam the report on the table, and I say, today is the day your life is about to change.
Nice.
But first I have to give you some very bad news. I mean, usually there's more nuance to that, but just to make it dramatic. But what I was doing with these doctor's appointments is I would come in with, here's what I want to accomplish. Here are the symptoms I want to talk about, the tests I want to run. And I would start to talk. And within 30 seconds, and I love doctors. I have relatives that are doctors. There are many doctors who saved my life. So I'm not trying to put this on them. It's on me. I would immediately let them take charge of the conversation.
Right.
And inevitably, because I wasn't stating what my needs were or my goals, they would leave and I would be sitting there like just saying, what just happened?
Yeah.
And so when I finally asked myself that question, I said, I just went from the Velvet Hammer in one situation to a, scared, timid person in a crinkly paper gown who was deciding not to articulate her needs.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just figure out what need isn't being met. We've really got to figure out what self-limiting pattern is that causing in us. Because unless we know that, we can't do the fourth step, which is to pick our pivot. Mm-hmm. And what that's essentially about is once you know what your self-limiting behavior is, and there's a lot of sort of nuance to this, but at a high level, pivoting means proactively moving away from those familiar shadow responses.
Yeah.
And experimenting with new ways of getting our needs met.
Nice.
So a quick example, just to carry through the illness example, what I started doing as an experiment, so I did two things. Number one, I spent 30 minutes a day reading dense rare disease research so that I would start to develop some hypotheses about what was wrong with me. And number two, I started making these 2-page printed medical summaries. Page 2 would be the history of all my symptoms. Page 1 would be my objectives for this appointment.
Right.
And the doctor would walk in and I would do the same thing I did with my CEOs, right? I'd slap it on the table. I'd say, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your wisdom and expertise. Here's what I'd like us to talk about today.
Nice.
Right? And so that was an example of, did that require me learning a new skill set? No. It actually required me remembering what I'm like at my best and applying it in this situation.
Before we go on, let me ask you, dear listener, what does your shadow self look like? I mean, how does it walk? How does it talk? How does it behave? How does it react? Because when we're under stress, our shadow self will often come out to play. Now, I'm going to do a solo episode on this, teaching some shadow work stuff, because I think it's so useful around self-awareness and self-growth. So more on that later. Tasha, what's the hardest thing about putting this process to play? Where do people get in their own way?
My sense is that the hardest thing for the high-achieving, ambitious people who are listening to this is trying to take on too much when you're moving from your self-limiting shadows to your pivots.
Yeah.
For me, what I tried to do, I actually only chose those two pivots, the reading 30 minutes of medical research and making the summaries. The only reason that list was so small was because I was so sick that was all I could do. But normally healthy Tasha I would have done what I did with my resilience practices during COVID, which was create a spreadsheet of 20 different resilience things that I needed to do every day and check it off. There's a concept in the book that's relevant here. I talk about strategic experiments. And what a strategic experiment is this is not a lifelong habit that I'm adopting.
Yeah.
This is not something that I'm going to stress myself out and do forever. It's something that I'm going to try that's going to take me a little bit farther away from that self-limiting shadow and a little bit more towards fulfilling my needs. So for me, what I realized in the 4-step process was my choice was being fundamentally frustrated.
Yeah.
I felt like I had no control over this. So the one thing initially it was just the reading and then it was the summaries. I said, what is one thing that I can do to take control?
Right.
And the research on this is actually pretty stunning. It shows that in the case of choice, for example, making one small thing, something as simple as I'm going to block off 15 minutes today to do something totally frivolous that I want to do, that's not productive, that no one wants me to do. I'm going to do it anyway. Right? Something like that. The act of making a small choice. And then, you sort of think about it, then you get in the groove and you do more strategic experiments and you start to make more choices for yourself. And then that's why I think about it as a pivot, right? It's not kind of you're going from A to B, it's you're going through this process to get on a different path. And then soon you've built a new good life. Sometimes we have to be shatterproof because we've lost things that we can't get back.
Yeah.
Or, things happen that can't be reversed. And I think the beauty of it is whether it's, kind of small, annoying setbacks or something really catastrophic like that, it's the same process. It's the same process.
Tasha, thank you. For people who want more of you, maybe for your speaking, learn more about the book, learn about your coaching that you do at an executive level, where can they find more about who you are?
Well, I always say, regrettably, I'm too easy to find. I get so sick of myself, especially when I'm on book tours.
I hear you.
Anyway, Tasha Eurich is my handle on everything. We have a new website for the book, shatterproof-book.com. And there is a free resilience ceiling assessment that your listeners can take to see how close they are to that limit of resilience. It's resilience-quiz.com.
Perfect. Resilience-quiz.com. That will be in the show notes for sure. Tasha Eurich, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure.
Tasha had a throwaway line there right at the end, and I just want to come back to it because it's important. She said, you get in the grooves and you do more strategic experiments and you start to make more choices for yourself. More strategic experiments. That's what I'm kind of pulling out and underlining, because this is a really useful idea. One, I first started to understand the power of it when I read Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's book, Immunity to Change. Because here's the deal. When you're trying to break patterns, when you're trying to figure out what the next best thing will be, come up with experiments to run. Don't come up with the idea, come up with experiments to run. Because the point of an experiment is not to fix the thing. The point of an experiment is to generate data so you can see if this is a good way to fix the thing. Now, I know that sounds like I'm playing with semantics, but actually, if you listen to that, if you sit with that, you'll see there's a world of difference between those two outcomes. Kim Collins of Good to Great talks about strategy being the process of firing bullets Let's call those small experiments so that you can figure out what the real target is, what the real strategy should be. And then when you figure that out, that's when you fire a cannonball. You commit to the best idea. And actually, Collins says most people don't fire enough bullets. They don't run enough experiments, in other words. And then often they might wimp out in terms of firing the cannonball, really committing to the best idea. I think that is a way of thinking about the world, bullets and cannonballs, experiments so you can pivot. That works for you and any commitment you have to become shatterproof, to get beyond resilience. I think it also works as a way of running change and transformation projects. It kind of upends the usual planning process, perhaps. If you'd like to run a small experiment by giving this podcast a rating, well, thank you. You can also tell a friend of yours about the episode, because that's all just great by me. Thank you in advance for your support. Thank you for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.